Ever walked into a room and felt like everyone's wearing a mask? Not the physical kind, but the kind that hides intentions, feelings, agendas. You look around and there's laughter, small talk, smiles, and yet something underneath it all feels off. It's like watching a play you didn't audition for. I've been in those rooms. I've sat through meetings where every nod was rehearsed and every silence was strategic. And the more you start noticing it, the more you realize people are constantly acting. But when you learn how to see through the performance, when you read not just what they're saying, but how they're saying it, everything shifts. You no longer take things at face value. You start to feel energy instead of just words. You sense hesitation, the fake enthusiasm, the nervous pauses. And once you unlock that, once you learn to listen with more than your ears, people begin to reveal themselves without even realizing it. Sometimes all it takes is 3 words, not questions, not arguments. Just, tell me more. I remember the first time I really used it, not as a tactic, but out of genuine curiosity. It was a silly argument about pineapple on pizza, but instead of launching into my opinion, I leaned back, smiled, and said those 3 words. What followed was a cascade. Stories about family, about childhood, about deeper reasons someone clung so tightly to a preference that seemed surface level. It wasn't about pineapple at all. It never is. It's about what's underneath. And when you give someone the space to unravel their own story without interruption, without judgment, they tell you everything. They might think they're just making conversation, but really they're showing you who they are. I've used it in business rooms, over coffee with friends, even in rooms where people were clearly trying to get away with something. I just nod, breathe, and say, tell me more. It doesn't disarm them, it invites them. And in that invitation, they forget to guard themselves. They stop trying to win and start trying to explain. And if you really listen, not just to the words, but the rhythm, the tone, the tension, they give you everything you need to know. Their motivations, their fears, what they're protecting, what they wish they could admit but haven't found the words for. But this isn't about manipulation. It's about empathy without entanglement. A Stoic sees, observes, understands, but does not absorb. When you see someone for who they truly are, you learn how to meet them there without losing yourself. You stop reacting and start understanding. You see past the smoke and mirrors and recognize the wound beneath the words. That's where trust lives. That's where truth lives. That's where connection, the real kind, takes root. Sometimes it's not about what they say at all. It's about who they are when they think no one important is watching. You can learn more about someone from how they treat a cashier than how they treat you. I've seen it. Someone who's charming and gracious to me, but turns cold and impatient with a waiter. And it's jarring, because in that moment, they're not performing. They're not trying to impress. They're revealing. The kindness they show when there's nothing to gain, that's the kindness that counts. People reveal their values in the little moments, in how they speak to someone with no influence, in whether they say thank you to someone holding a door, in whether they make eye contact with a janitor. And those moments, they matter more than grand gestures, because they show the undercurrent of someone's character, not the curated version, the real one. And here's the truth. People aren't just reacting to you, they're reacting to every story, every scar, every moment they've ever lived. Their past isn't behind them. It's stitched into their every response. The defensive coworker, they're probably not mad at you. They're protecting an old wound. The partner who can't commit, they might still be carrying the weight of a betrayal they never healed from. We all have echoes. Sometimes we speak them out loud. Sometimes we just live them. And if you know how to listen, not just to the words, but to the pain behind them, you'll hear the whole story without them ever needing to say it. But don't confuse understanding for tolerance. Seeing someone's wounds doesn't mean letting them bleed all over you. Awareness is a tool, not a trap. You use it to move with wisdom, not to justify staying stuck in cycles that hurt. You can love someone and still protect your peace. You can forgive someone and still walk away. Compassion doesn't mean martyrdom. It means seeing clearly and choosing consciously. And sometimes clarity comes through a single shift, a moment when their voice changes, just slightly. Maybe their tone drops, maybe their words slow down, maybe the excitement in their voice disappears. I remember once in a conversation about deadlines, a person who always sounded confident suddenly hesitated. Their voice wavered just for a beat. And in that space, I knew they weren't being honest. They were holding something back. People can train their faces, even their words. But the voice doesn't lie. It cracks, it hesitates, it speeds up, it stretches syllables. And when that happens, it's like a window opening, just long enough for you to see what they're trying to hide. Not every shift means a lie. Sometimes it means discomfort, uncertainty, internal conflict. But those shifts matter. They're the places where truth gets tangled, where fear starts whispering. And if you're really tuned in, you'll feel it. You'll see it before it becomes obvious. And that awareness, that's your edge. That's your protection. But more than that, it's your path to wisdom. Because the people who react most emotionally, the ones who explode or shut down or get overly excited, they're showing you what matters to them. Their reactions are roadmaps. That friend who always bristles when their ideas are challenged, they tie their self-worth to being right. The partner who shuts down when plans change, they crave stability. The boss who loses it when questioned, their power's fragile. Emotions reveal priorities, not always consciously, but consistently. And it's not just about them, it's about you too. Your reactions show you where you've attached meaning, where your ego still grips, where your fears still whisper. That moment when you feel defensive because someone challenged your opinion, what are you really defending? The idea or your identity? That moment when someone cancels on you and you feel crushed, was it the cancellation or the story you told yourself about what it means? Every reaction is an invitation, not just to understand others, but to understand yourself. And sometimes you'll learn the most, not in conversations, not in debates, not in long, heartfelt talks, but in those fleeting, unguarded moments. When someone thinks no one is watching, the way they look at someone struggling, the way they treat themselves when they mess up, the tone they use with people who can't fight back. That's where the truth lives, not in the spotlight, but in the shadows. And you'll learn to stop filling every silence. You'll learn to ask questions not to trap people, but to see them. You'll learn to hold space without solving, to understand without absorbing, to observe without reacting. That's what Stoicism teaches us, not to harden, but to see clearly, not to detach from life, but to meet it with grounded presence, not to avoid emotion, but to recognize its source. Because in the end, understanding people isn't about having the upper hand. It's about moving through the world with wisdom. It's about knowing when to lean in and when to step back, when to stay and when to walk away, when to speak and when to simply listen. And when you master that balance, life gets quieter. Not because there's less happening, but because you're no longer at the mercy of everything that does. You become a mirror, a still point, a presence. And in that presence, people reveal who they truly are. Not because you ask, but because you finally learned how to listen. There are moments when people show you exactly who they are, but it happens so quickly, so subtly, that if you're not paying attention, you'll miss it. It's not in the speeches they give or the carefully constructed stories they tell about themselves. It's in the moments between the lines, the slight change in their expression when someone else is praised, the way they respond to your success, how they act when you're not the center of attention. If you want to really know someone, watch how they behave when they're not being watched. That's the version that counts. That's the truth they can't filter. And once you learn how to see that, how to listen between the words, you start realizing how often people contradict themselves. They say they value honesty, but they hide everything that might make them look bad. They say they love loyalty, but their actions switch up as soon as someone more interesting walks into the room. They say they care about you, but somehow they only reach out when they need something. They tell you they're busy, but they always seem to make time for the people they actually want to talk to. People say a lot of things, but energy? Energy never lies. That's why silence is so powerful. When you stop filling every space with words, when you allow room for people to speak and show themselves, you start noticing things you couldn't see before. You realize some people only engage with you when they have something to gain. You begin to catch the rhythm of manipulation, the timing of their compliments, the way they apologize without ever taking real accountability. And you begin to wonder how much of your past you've spent surrounded by people who weren't really there for you, but for the version of you that was most useful to them. That kind of realization doesn't come easy. It hurts to admit you've been used. It's painful to realize you spent months or even years investing in relationships where your value was measured by what you could offer. But what's worse is pretending you don't see it, continuing to stay close to people who've already shown you who they are. That's the mistake most people make. They notice the red flags, they feel the discomfort, they sense the shift, but they keep going because they're scared. Scared of being alone, scared of starting over, scared of confrontation. So they silence their gut, they ignore their intuition, and they tell themselves it's not that deep. But it is that deep. Because every time you choose to stay silent about what's hurting you, you're betraying yourself. Every time you downplay the disrespect, every time you let someone off the hook just because the truth is inconvenient, you're teaching yourself that your pain doesn't matter, that your boundaries are flexible, that your needs are secondary. And that kind of internal betrayal builds over time, until one day you wake up completely disconnected from your own truth. That's why stillness is necessary. Not the kind of stillness that isolates you in bitterness, but the kind that brings you back to yourself. It's in that space that you remember what it feels like to trust your gut, to believe your own voice, to stop outsourcing your worth to people who only value you when you're easy to control. And when you do that, when you come back to yourself, you start noticing how much noise you were surrounded by. How many people talked but never heard you? How many friendships were really just long-term performances where you played the role they assigned you and smiled through your own discomfort? You remember all the times you laughed at jokes that cut too deep. The way you downplayed your wins so others wouldn't feel threatened. The way you dimmed your light because shining too brightly made you a target, but not anymore. Now you honor your light. You protect your peace like it's priceless, because it is. You stop explaining your boundaries like they're up for debate. You stop watering yourself down to be more digestible. You understand that the people who are really meant for you won't ask you to cut pieces of yourself off just to fit into their lives. They'll make room. They'll adjust. They'll evolve with you, not against you. And yes, you'll lose people in that process. You'll outgrow dynamics that once felt like home. You'll grieve relationships that were built on unspoken compromises. But what you gain is worth it. Because what you gain is you, your truth, your voice, your peace. And once you taste that level of freedom, you'll never trade it again. You'll start moving differently. You won't respond just because someone reached out. You won't apologize for not being available 24/7. You won't accept breadcrumb energy from people who've already shown they're capable of more. You won't engage in conversations that are rooted in ego, not connection. You won't explain your healing process to people who never cared about your pain in the first place. And the more you do this, the more you'll attract people who are walking the same path. People who are grounded, people who listen without waiting to reply, people who speak with intention, people who celebrate your wins without turning it into a competition, people who hold space for your tears without trying to fix you. Those are your people, the ones who don't just want your energy, they want your wellness, your presence, your growth. But before you find those people, you have to be willing to walk through the valley of solitude. You have to be willing to be misunderstood, to be left on read, to be left out, to walk away from tables where you once begged for a seat. Because the truth is, peace doesn't always come with company. Sometimes it comes in the quiet, when you finally stop pretending, when you finally stop performing, when you finally say, "This is who I am, take it or leave it," and you watch. You watch who stays. You watch who leans in. You watch who steps up. Not because you begged them to, but because your truth called them higher. You don't force anymore. You don't chase. You attract. Through clarity, through consistency, through alignment. And even when it's hard, even when you miss the comfort of old patterns, you hold the line. Because now you know what's at stake. You know what it costs to betray yourself. And you're not willing to pay that price anymore. So you sit in your truth, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it's lonely, even when the world tells you to water it down. You sit in it, you breathe in it, you become it. And from that place, everything begins to shift. Not because life suddenly gets easier, but because you stop making it harder by pretending to be someone you're not. And that kind of shift, it's the most powerful thing you can experience. Because from that point on, you don't just walk through life, you own it. Ever felt like everyone around you is putting on a performance? Like you're surrounded not by real people, but by characters in a play, each wearing a carefully chosen mask? I know that feeling all too well. There's something strange about it, watching people act out roles they've built to survive, or to thrive, or just to be accepted. But once you learn to tune into the quiet details, the tiny cues hidden beneath their words and actions, everything changes. Suddenly, you can see right through the performance. I remember being in this one meeting, everyone sitting in a polished boardroom, nodding, smiling, echoing corporate buzzwords with the enthusiasm of a motivational poster. But something felt off. You could see it in the restless shuffle of a foot, the way someone avoided eye contact, the oddly timed silence. They weren't just agreeing, they were calculating, hiding something behind those grins. And once you spot it, you can't unsee it. It's like unlocking a cheat code to human behavior. There's a phrase I picked up years ago that changed everything for me. Just 3 words, not dramatic, not flashy, but those words, they're magic. Tell me more. You wouldn't believe how powerful it is until you try it. The first time I used it was during a petty argument with a friend, over pineapple on pizza of all things. I was fully geared up for a debate, ready to prove them wrong with a stack of logic. But something held me back. I paused, took a breath, then said, "Tell me more." That simple request flipped the whole conversation. They started talking about the pizza, sure, but then it unraveled into stories about their childhood, family dinners, memories wrapped around flavors, and even a random experience that made them hate pineapple as a kid. It was no longer about toppings. It was a glimpse into who they were. You see, when someone feels heard, truly heard, they let their guard down. They don't feel the need to defend or deflect. They begin to speak from a place of openness, not performance. Suddenly, you're not just hearing their opinions. You're being invited into their history, their pain, their joy. I've used the same approach in high-stakes negotiations and casual hangouts alike. Once, during a particularly tense business discussion, I abandoned my prepared pitch and just listened. I kept gently nudging with those same 3 words. Tell me more. Bit by bit, the other side unfolded everything. Their stress, their urgency, their weaknesses. By the end, they had handed me everything I needed without even realizing it. Not because I outsmarted them, but because I gave them space to talk. The beauty of this isn't manipulation, it's connection. In a world where everyone wants to be heard, but so few are truly listening, offering your full attention becomes an extraordinary gift. It's about stepping away from your own ego and into someone else's perspective. You're not arguing, not convincing, you're observing, understanding, letting them show you who they are. It reflects a core value we hold at Forge of Wisdom: presence without judgment, empathy without attachment. You're not trying to steer the conversation. You're simply watching the current flow. Here's the thing. When you observe people from this space of quiet presence, you start to see more than just their stories. You see their truths, their fears, their hopes. It's all hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone to simply pay attention. Another trick? Watch how people treat those they think are beneath them. I mean, really watch. Not how they act toward you or their boss or someone they admire, but how they behave around a server, a janitor, or the intern who just started last week. I'll never forget the day I saw someone I respected completely unravel in this way. In meetings, he was all charm, smooth, polite, the kind of guy who made everyone feel like a genius. But then we went to lunch, and the second the waiter approached, something shifted. He barked his order like he was a king addressing a peasant. No eye contact, no thank you, just cold arrogance. In that moment, everything clicked. The polite mask wasn't kindness, it was strategy, a performance for those he saw as useful. But when faced with someone he deemed irrelevant, his real character slipped through. It's a hard truth, but an important one. How someone treats those with no power says more about their soul than how they treat those they admire. If kindness is only given when it can be rewarded, it's not kindness, it's calculation. And here's the deeper insight from Forge of Wisdom. People often act cruelly when they think no one important is watching, because deep down they believe those below them don't matter. But the people who treat everyone with respect, regardless of status, those are the people worth knowing. That's integrity. I've started using this as my silent measure. I watch, I listen, not to what people say in public, but to how they behave in the quiet moments, the ones no one else notices. And then there's this idea, one that's uncomfortable but revealing. If you want to understand someone, you need to look backward, because the past is never really behind us. It's stitched into who we are. The way someone reacts to stress, the way they love, the way they protect themselves. It's all a result of what came before. I had a friend who always seemed on edge, hyper-defensive, quick to explode at the smallest slight. At first I thought, that's just their personality. But over time they shared bits and pieces, stories of betrayal, loss, abandonment. It all made sense. They weren't just reacting to the present, they were still living inside the echoes of their past. People don't always realize it, but their past shapes their patterns. A child who never felt seen grows into an adult desperate for validation. Someone betrayed in business may become distrustful of every new opportunity. It's not just personality, it's armor. Stoicism teaches us not to judge, but to understand. When you view people through this lens, not with pity but with clarity, you start to see their actions not as random, but as survival. That doesn't mean you excuse toxic behavior, but it does mean you recognize where it's coming from. And in some cases, you can even help them see it too. Patterns repeat until someone notices them. That friend who keeps sabotaging relationships, it's likely not about the current partner. It's about something unhealed from years ago. That colleague who always needs to prove their worth, they might still be trying to earn approval they never got as a child. By paying attention to the patterns, You can sometimes guide people to awareness, not by confronting them aggressively, but by asking the right questions, by holding space for the truth to emerge. That's the power of understanding. Not control, but clarity. And speaking of clarity, one of the most reliable signals that someone is hiding something lies in their voice, not in their words, in their tone. People lie in subtle ways. They cover things up, mask discomfort with smiles or jokes. But their voice, that's where the truth leaks out. I once worked with a guy who was a master of persuasion, smooth, articulate, always had the right words. But during one conversation, as we discussed a looming deadline, something shifted. His usual confident tone cracked just slightly. His pace slowed. A hesitation slipped in. That was all it took for me to know. Something was off, and I was right. He hadn't touched the project, but was trying to bluff his way through. That crack in his tone gave him away. Here's why it happens. When someone lies or feels uncertain, their mind and body go to war. Their brain is trying to keep the story straight, but their body, the voice especially, starts to betray them. It's not just nerves, it's discomfort with deception. So if you're listening closely and you hear a sudden shift in pitch, an unnatural cheerfulness, or a pause that lasts a second too long, trust it. That's the truth trying to squeeze through the cracks. Sometimes it's not even about lying, it's just hesitation. That friend who sounds excited until you suggest something they secretly don't want to do. Listen to how their voice changes, the drop in energy, the sudden flatness. They may say yes, but their tone says no. Forge of Wisdom encourages this type of listening, not just with your ears, but with your awareness. When someone's words and tone don't match, don't ignore that. Ask yourself, what are they really saying? And finally, the most revealing behavior of all, how someone acts when they think no one's watching. That's when masks fall. That's when you see the person, not the performance. I once had a manager who was all smiles and support in front of the team, but behind closed doors, she was cold, dismissive, even cruel. It wasn't an accident. It was her default when the audience was gone. The truth is, most people wear a mask in public. They've been conditioned to play roles, charming, respectful, confident. But the second they think they're alone, the truth seeps out. That's when the real character shows. So if you want to know someone, don't watch them when they're on stage. Watch them in the wings. See how they treat someone they think doesn't matter. See how they speak when the cameras are off. That's where the truth lives. And once you see it, it changes everything. There's something deeply revealing about a person's emotional reactions, the rawness of their response, the heat or light in their voice, the tension in their body when something unexpected happens. It's like a spotlight shining on their priorities. You don't need them to spell it out for you. Just watch how they respond, and their values practically announce themselves. I had this colleague once, someone who always kept their cool. No matter the pressure, no matter the deadline, they had this zen-like calm. That is, until someone made a casual suggestion about revising one of his projects. Just a tweak, a minor adjustment. But suddenly he flared. Anger, irritation, defensiveness, all of it boiled over in seconds. And in that flash of emotion, the truth came out. That project wasn't just work to him, it was personal. His identity was wrapped around it. And that's the secret. People's emotions point straight to what matters most to them. It's rarely about the surface issue. It's about something deeper, a value, a fear, a wound. The executive who snaps when his authority is questioned, it's not just ego. It's likely tied to a lifelong need to feel in control. The friend who bristles when you mention something minor they forgot, maybe they've been fighting their whole life not to be seen as careless or unreliable. We like to believe we're logical creatures, guided by reason. But the truth? Emotion drives more of our decisions than we'd care to admit. And when someone reacts emotionally, they're handing you a map of their inner world. Even excitement can reveal just as much. Watch someone talk about their passion project or that hobby they keep coming back to, and you'll see their eyes light up in a way that's impossible to fake. Their energy changes. They're not just talking, they're alive. Those moments are priceless because they tell you what truly feeds their spirit. In relationships, this awareness becomes even more important. Let's say you're dating someone who gets unreasonably upset when plans fall through. On the surface, it might seem like they're overreacting, but dig a little deeper and maybe you'll see that quality time is how they feel loved. So when plans are canceled, it hits harder than just a change in schedule. It feels like rejection. Their emotion tells you what they value: connection, presence, maybe even certainty. I've seen this pattern so many times. A person who freaks out when they're not included in a group event. It's not about the party, it's about belonging. A coworker who becomes strangely competitive over minor things. Probably struggling with self-worth that's tied to external validation. And it's in those emotional spikes, those flare-ups of frustration or enthusiasm, where their truth shines through. What's powerful about noticing this is not just that you understand others better, but that you start to understand yourself too. Your own reactions become your guide. The times you get angry, insecure, or overly excited, those are the trailheads leading back to your core priorities, your values, your fears. Stoicism doesn't ask you to suppress emotion. It asks you to observe it, to recognize that strong feelings are not the enemy, they're the messengers. Every time your heart pounds, or your breath quickens, or your voice rises, it's like your soul is whispering, "This matters to me." The trick is to notice without judgment. You're not trying to silence the emotion or push it away. You're letting it inform you. And once you understand what stirs you, what sets you off or lifts you up, you begin to navigate life with greater clarity. You become harder to manipulate, harder to shake, because now you're not reacting blindly. You're seeing the truth behind the reaction. And the more you notice this in others, the more obvious it becomes. The lies people tell with their faces, their words, their actions, they don't hold up under emotional pressure. You see it in the inconsistencies. The moment their voice doesn't match their message, the times they try to smile, but their eyes betray sadness or contempt. It's all there if you're paying attention. I remember someone I dated once. On the surface, everything seemed fine. They said all the right things, played the part of someone emotionally available, interested, invested. But then there were these moments, tiny ones, where their guard would slip, a tone shift, a too long pause, a hint of resentment behind a joke, and those little cracks told me more than their words ever could. Eventually, the truth came out. They were still caught up in the past, still haunted by an old heartbreak they'd never processed, and everything they did in their relationship with me was colored by that pain. But the signs had been there from the start. All I had to do was listen, not just to their words, but to everything else. This kind of awareness becomes second nature over time. You stop taking people at face value, not because you're cynical, but because you've learned that what's most important is often unsaid. And most people, whether they realize it or not, are constantly leaking truth. Sometimes the most telling moments are the smallest ones. The quiet sigh after a meeting, the way someone's smile fades when they think no one's looking, or how they talk about someone when they think it's safe to be honest. People will show you who they are, all the time. Not when they're trying to impress you, but when they think you're not paying attention. And that brings us to one of the most underrated skills in human interaction: noticing the unguarded moments. These are the seconds people reveal their true nature. When the show is over, when the audience is gone, when they believe their actions don't matter because no one important is watching. I once worked with someone who was always the star in public, warm, charismatic, always knew the right thing to say. But the moment we were alone and the cameras, so to speak, were off, he was dismissive, cold, sometimes even cruel. He'd put on a show for everyone else, but in private, he didn't even try to fake it. At first, I brushed it off. Maybe he was just tired, I thought. Maybe I caught him on a bad day. But it kept happening. And that's when I realized this wasn't the exception. This was the truth. It's easy to act virtuous when you're being watched. That's the nature of social conditioning. But your real values, they show up when you think no one's looking. Forge of Wisdom has always taught that real character isn't how you behave when you're applauded. It's how you act in silence, without witnesses, without rewards, when the spotlight's gone. I started applying this lens everywhere, watching not how people acted when they were trying to win favor, but how they behaved when they had nothing to gain. And I began seeing the real story beneath the social mask. Like the guy who always held the door for the CEO, but never once acknowledged the cleaning staff, or the woman who complimented everyone at the table, then trashed them as soon as they left. These weren't just personality quirks. They were patterns, red flags, revelations. Even more subtle were the things people didn't say, the jokes they let slide, the times they stayed silent in the face of someone else's mistreatment. Those choices spoke louder than any words. It's in these invisible decisions, the unacknowledged, uncelebrated ones, that we see true ethics or the lack of them. You'll know someone's real character by what they do when their actions have no audience, no reward, and no applause. And here's the hardest part. That includes you. Who are you when no one's looking? Do you keep your promises when there's no one to hold you accountable? Do you treat people with kindness even when you're tired, annoyed, or in a bad mood? Do you uphold your values when doing so comes at a cost? Because that, in the end, is what separates wisdom from performance. Consistency, integrity, the kind of quiet strength that doesn't need recognition. Forge of Wisdom isn't just about observing others. It's about applying those same lenses to yourself. Because the more honest you are about your own patterns, the more deeply you'll understand the world around you. So the next time you find yourself reacting strongly, whether in anger, excitement, or fear, pause. Ask yourself, what does this emotion say about what I value? What does it reveal about my priorities? And then do the same when you're observing someone else. Watch for the emotions, the tone shifts, the cracks in the mask, and especially watch them when they think no one sees. Because those are the moments when truth rises to the surface, unfiltered and undeniable. And once you learn to see it, really see it, you'll never look at people the same way again. There's something almost magical about body language. It's the language that never lies, even when words do. Long before people speak, before they form sentences or choose the right tone, their body's already having a conversation with you. The way they sit, how they shift their weight, what their hands do when they're nervous, all of it tells a story if you know how to listen. I remember being at this networking event once where everyone was trying to impress each other, throwing around job titles and accomplishments like confetti. And there was this one guy, slick, confident, flashing a practiced smile that probably worked on 100 people before me. He was saying all the right things, but something felt off. His eyes didn't stay still. His fingers kept tapping the edge of his glass. His shoulders were too tight for someone so relaxed. It didn't take long for the cracks to show. Turns out most of what he said wasn't even true. He'd built a persona because he thought that's what people wanted, but his body told the truth. It always does. That's the thing. People rehearse their words, but they rarely rehearse their posture. They can memorize a lie, but their nervous tics. Those slip through the cracks. We all have our tells. A person might nod too eagerly when they were trying to fake agreement. Someone trying to hide guilt might avoid eye contact, not because they're shy, but because their conscience is buzzing like a silent alarm. And confidence? Real confidence walks in the door before a single word is spoken. It lives in stillness, in the calm ease of someone who isn't performing. At Forge of Wisdom, we've learned that body language is one of the oldest forms of communication. Older than words, more honest than intentions. And once you start paying attention to it, you begin to see past the surface. You stop falling for the performance and start catching glimpses of the real person underneath. There's a kind of power in that, but not the manipulative kind. The power to understand, to walk into a room and read the emotional temperature without anyone saying a word, to see who's uncomfortable, who's angry, who's pretending, and who's actually present. Sometimes it's not even about lies or discomfort. It's about recognizing where someone is emotionally. I had a friend once who used to always show up full of energy, life of the party, bright smile, loud laugh. But one day something changed. The smile was still there, but the way it hung on her face looked heavy, like it was taking effort to hold it up. Her posture was different, shoulders curled in, arms crossed more often. No one else noticed. They kept laughing at her jokes, but I saw it, and later when we were alone, I asked if she was okay. That's when the truth poured out. Anxiety, burnout, personal stuff she hadn't told anyone about. Her body had been carrying the weight of it all before her words ever could. That's why it matters to watch, not just with your eyes, but with your awareness. Because body language isn't just about catching lies. It's about seeing pain that someone doesn't know how to speak out loud. It's about recognizing disconnection, discomfort, even hidden joy. You start realizing that the people who are the loudest in the room are often the ones trying hardest to hide something, and the ones who seem distant might just be protecting their energy, not because they're cold, but because they're tired of being misunderstood. There's this beautiful thing that happens when you stop trying to read people through their words alone. You begin to understand them in ways they haven't even understood themselves. That guy who always makes sarcastic jokes. Maybe he's deflecting because vulnerability terrifies him. That colleague who always interrupts others. Maybe it's less arrogance and more about growing up in an environment where no one listened unless they spoke over people. It doesn't excuse behavior, but it explains it. And understanding, real understanding, gives you the power to respond with wisdom instead of reaction. Now here's where it gets really interesting. Sometimes it's not what people do, but what they stop doing that tells you everything. I've had relationships where things didn't end with a dramatic fight or a final straw. They ended with silence, with shorter replies, with the absence of the little gestures that once spoke volumes. And at first, it's easy to overlook, easy to think, they're just busy, or maybe it's nothing. But then you realize the energy has shifted, the warmth is gone, and no one's saying it out loud, but it's written in the empty spaces between texts, in the delayed responses, in the eye contact that no longer lingers. People don't always announce their exit. Sometimes they just start withdrawing piece by piece until there's nothing left but a hollow version of what once was. And that's what you have to watch for, not just what's present, but what's missing. The friend who used to call just to say hi, and now only texts when they need something. The coworker who used to laugh at your jokes, and now just offers a polite nod. The partner who used to reach for your hand without thinking, and now doesn't even notice when you're standing next to them. These moments are painful, but they're also illuminating, because they remind you of something vital. Relationships live in the small things, and when those small things disappear, it's a sign that something deeper has shifted. Forge of Wisdom always reminds us that awareness is the key to clarity, and that includes being aware of what's fading, because silence can speak louder than words. Absence can carry more weight than presence. But here's a twist. Sometimes the people who disappear from your life weren't meant to stay. And their silence, that's their truth. That's their answer. You don't always need closure in the form of an explanation. Sometimes the lack of effort, the withdrawal, the fading, that is the closure. And your job isn't to chase or fix. It's to observe, to learn, and to carry the lesson forward, not the resentment. Now, what happens when you're the one pulling back? What happens when you catch yourself shrinking, avoiding, detaching? That's when the spotlight turns inward. That's when you begin to ask the questions that matter. Why did I react that way? Why did I feel the need to lie, even about something small? Why did I pretend to be okay when I wasn't? The hard truth is, we all wear masks sometimes. We all hide parts of ourselves, maybe to protect, maybe to survive, maybe just because we don't think we'll be accepted.